Hi everybody, and welcome to our side event on operationalizing a do no harm approach to PCVE. My name is Adrián Carbajo, and I am a program manager at the International Institute for Justice and the Rule of Law, the IIJ. Before we start, I'd like to share a few instructions with you on how to use Microsoft Teams during today's side event. First, would like to kindly ask you to remain muted throughout the whole duration of the event. If you need to communicate with us, the organizers, or ask questions to our speakers, we'd like to use the chat for that. Second, we'd like to remind you that this side event will be recorded, and the recording will be made available in our social media channels in the coming days. We would also like to take some pictures of you to use in our outreach material. However, we would like to take those pictures at the closing of the event. For now, if possible, would be grateful if you could turn off your cameras so we make sure that those participants with low bandwidths do not lose connectivity throughout the duration of the side event. And lastly, some of our speakers will be using slides today, PowerPoint slides, and we will share those with you once the event is over. That is all from my side. I will now give the floor to Mr. Thomas Vuchti, the Executive Secretary of the IIJ, to open this side event.
Thank you, Adrian. Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, and welcome to this UN side event on operationalizing a do-no-harm approach to PCVE, co-organized with the European Union. Thank you, Nadia, my other opener, who I will introduce shortly. My name is Tom Vuchti, and I am the Executive Secretary of the International Institute for Justice and the Rule of Law. Some of you might already be familiar with our work. For those of you who don't know us quite so well, I'd like to start my remarks by some brief introduction. The IIJ is an intergovernmental organization based with training on lawmakers, police, prosecutors, judges, and other criminal justice sector stakeholders on how to address terrorism and related transnational activities. Although the IIJ's mandate is global in nature, much of our work is in partnership with countries in Northwest and East Africa and the Middle East. Tackling this complex security nexus requires multi-actor collaboration within each country, which has been recognized by policymakers and practitioners worldwide. This collaboration is particularly important when it comes to developing programs to identify, intervene, redirect, and most importantly, support individuals who are assessed to be vulnerable to or at risk or already on the path to radicalization to violent extremism or have expressed interest in engaging in terrorist activity but have not committed crimes. This is an area that has received enhanced attention from a growing number of governments who have established mechanisms to prevent young people from embracing violent extremism and more broadly to put into practice a whole-of-society approach to preventing and countering violent extremism. Unfortunately, there are numerous practical capacity and other challenges to designing and sustaining these types of programs, such as trust deficits, including between the police and community members, and limited resources or institutional capacities. Despite these challenges, few training or other capacity-building tools have existed to support their development in different interagency contexts. This is why the IIJ, with the support from the European Union, launched a project in November of 2019 to address this gap by designing the first-of-its-kind training curriculum in this area. This curriculum was developed by a team of experienced practitioners and draws from the recommendations and guidance developed by the United Nations, builds on a body of work from the OSCE, the Global Counter-Terrorism Forum, the European Union, and of course other multilateral partner bodies. The completed curriculum was further informed by 2 sets of expert consultations and pilot workshops in Kenya and North Macedonia. And I'm really pleased to report that despite the challenges during the pandemic, this turned out to be an excellent opportunity to work on this curriculum and get it finished. We're very happy to see that some of these practitioners have joined us here today online. This workshop represents a milestone of the IIJ. Not only are we launching officially our training curriculum, but with 150 people registered in attendance, this is the largest event that we've organized. You can understand that this is an exciting moment for us, and we hope for you too. Before concluding, I would like to thank again the European Union for their support to this project and for sponsoring this side event, and I thank you all once again for being here today. I now, with great pleasure, would like to introduce our co-opener, Nadia Constantini, who is the head of division for counterterrorism at the European External Action Service. In this position, she manages the team engaged in pushing forward the EU counterterrorism and countering violent extremism agenda, a close partner with the IIJ, and for 20 years of experience in the European foreign policy world, including in EU delegations. She was previously the deputy head of division for human rights at the External Action Service, a core area of the work of the IIJ. She's also worked with Multilateral Relations Division and co-chaired the working group with the UN, and also covered the Lebanon and Russian desks and served in EU delegations in Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Prague. Nadia, really looking forward to your comments and welcome remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tom, and a warm welcome to all speakers and participants to this virtual event of the IIJ. I'm very happy to be here with you today. After the horrific events of 9/11. As the European Union High Representative and Vice President Borrell said yesterday at the opening of the high-level conference, our experience with counterterrorism and preventing violent extremism over the past 20 years has shown that there are no easy answers or quick solutions. We need to continuously examine our actions, our approaches, and draw the right lessons to strengthen our collective, and I want to stress collective, action against terrorism. As Tom already mentioned, actually one of those lessons is that the whole of society approach is key to preventing radicalization. It takes a village to counter radicalization and support individuals and communities at risk. Involvement of all actors, including social workers, health professionals, religious leaders, and teachers, is necessary to identify, intervene, redirect, and support individuals who are on the path to radicalization, to violent extremism, or have expressed an interest in engaging in terrorist activity. It is really important that all these actors are equipped to work well together and in sync to be successful in this endeavor. In the EU, we established in 2011 the Radicalization Awareness Network, RAN. This is really our brand, which this network brings practitioners together to equip them with new skills and confidence to help address the challenges and share best practices. To date, the RAN features something like over 7,000 practitioners across the EU, including civil society representatives, social workers, youth workers, teachers, healthcare professionals, local authorities representatives, very important, police officers and prison officers. The EU Radicalization Awareness Networks works closely with communities, including families and social care providers, who play a key role in preventing radicalization and violent extremism. With RAN, the EU supports the development of a multi-agency response which connects these frontline practitioners to governments, authorities to deliver effective responses. Also, when supporting countries outside the EU to build capacity, the EU equally uses the whole of society approach that involves governments, multilateral bodies, and private sector, civil society, and local communities. We have supported evidence-based actions aimed at strengthening the resilience of individuals and communities to the appeal of violent extremism. For example, through community and interfaith dialogue. We've had some very big initiatives in this realm, mentorship programs, as well as community policing. Whilst doing so, we put forward an approach to ensure that our CTP CVE interventions respect the twin principles of do no harm and do maximum good. By ensuring that project interventions do not cause human rights violations, exacerbate divisions between institutions and communities, and worsen existing grievances. And I want to stress the word grievances that I think in this context is extremely important to understand the subject matter. To this end, we provide operational guidance to our partners on how to mitigate risk and ensure that PCV interventions strike a balance of achieving intended impact while adopting, for instance, conflict-sensitive approaches which aim to minimize harm. So it is in this light that we have financially supported the IIJ to develop this new curriculum to bring actors together and empower communities to build resilience bottom up. I congratulate you for having rolled out successful pilot phases on the training in two very distinct contexts, as Tom was mentioning earlier, Kenya and North Macedonia. We are proud and honored to discuss the results with such a distinguished audience today. Thank you, Tom, and over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Costantini, Nadia, for your kind words and for your support to our work. I'll now like to give the floor to our first speakers of the day, Mr. Eric Rosend and Ms. Nadia Gerspacher, who will provide you with an overview of the goals, the structure and content of our innovative training curriculum, as well as of the theory of change behind it. Eric is a Senior Associate Fellow at RUSI, President and Founder of PVE Solutions, and Interim Director of the Strong Cities Network. He has spent nearly 2 decades working on international counterterrorism and CVE issues, including as a senior official at the US State Department, where he led efforts to develop the GCTF and its inspired institutions, including the IIJ. Nadia is an author, thought leader, curriculum developer and instructor who has been working with police organizations and security institutions for over 15 years in many countries around the world. As Director of Security Sector Programs at the US Institute of Peace, she developed a series of courses and programs of instruction for police assistance, which were leveraged by police in Europe and the Americas. She has developed partnerships with several international organizations and centers of excellence to support their efforts at helping their member states gain insights on community-oriented policing. Eric, Nadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adrian, and to the EU and the IIJ for driving this project. Allow me to say briefly that this curriculum was developed on the expectation that by providing relevant individual government and non-governmental actors the tools to develop these multi-actor intervention programs, it will not only increase the likelihood that these programs are developed, but also operationalized in an effective and sustainable manner that respects the do no harm principle. That should be the foundation of all PCVE work. Unfortunately, it's a principle that is often easier to articulate than it is to operationalize, and thus the real value, we think, of this curriculum. Although it's primarily focused on what is called secondary prevention, So individuals who are on the path to or vulnerable or at risk of violent extremism, but have not yet committed a crime. It's equally applicable to the tertiary prevention space, which is, of course, focused on those terrorist offenders, former terrorist offenders, and individuals who have had some association with terrorism or terrorist groups, but have not yet been convicted or even charged with criminal activity. The course has been designed with 3 overarching objectives: to contribute to the design and implementation of these multi-actor intervention programs, while of course taking into account local context and needs, to demonstrate the value of and grow the knowledge around these interventions that draw on the expertise from a diversity of disciplines and multiple actors, and to enhance the effectiveness of intervention programs to increase social cohesion and or decrease terrorism. We worked with a team of 12 experts from different disciplines designing the modules. I think there are about 12 of them. They involve a mixture of presentations, facilitated discussion, and breakout activities. For each module, there's a background script to guide the facilitator or the trainer, a set of PowerPoint slides with notes for the facilitator, and depending on the context in which the course is delivered, one or more of the modules may be needed. In some cases, the entire package would be delivered. In other cases, just a fraction of that. Of course, prior to any such delivery, the course will need to be tailored for the specific context in which it's being offered. Let me briefly just run through some of the topics in the modules to give you a sense of the content. The first module is focused on collaboration and partnership building, which Nadia will talk about after I'm done speaking. A second module is how to ensure that the diversity of actors involved in these programs share a common understanding of the relevant terminology and concepts. This means, for example, that the different professionals involved in the program, some of whom may be unfamiliar with the PCVE field, are on the same page in relation to terminology and definitions, whether it's definitions about terrorism, violent extremism, preventing and countering violent extremism or radicalization, or what have you, and that they understand the complexity of radicalization to violence and the benefits of adopting a team-oriented public health approach to the challenge. A third module focuses on the need to identify common features in these programs, while recognizing there can be no one-size-fits-all approach. Some of the features that are commonly found across the world here are the voluntariness of the programs that are based on consent of the participants, the multiple actors, agencies, civil society organizations, disciplines involved, and sometimes even the police. That the referrals to these programs come from multiple sources: families, communities, school teachers, parents, even the police. They rely on contextualized, individualized assessments of behaviors. They are privacy protecting information sharing protocols in place to ensure that the necessary information is shared among the practitioners, but that the privacy of the individual participating in the program is protected. They involve typically a set of tailored intervention or support plans that address a wide set of factors that can make someone vulnerable to violent extremism. And perhaps most importantly, they're grounded in basic levels of trust among the professionals, between the professionals and the individuals in the program, and with the community more broadly. There's a module on the importance of mapping local contexts, on how to build a team, including by promoting trust, transparency, and consensus building among team members, how to identify the capacities and resources necessary to operationalize the team. This means which institutions, organizations, professionals, programs, and other actors in the community, in the region, need to be involved, and that they understand the nature and scope of their contribution when they are involved, and the need to understand what kind of capacity building support they might require, training they might need to be able to make a meaningful contribution to the program. There's a session on case management, meaning how to develop a system for receiving and processing information on individuals who might benefit from a multi-actor PCV intervention program. This involves identifying the appropriate referral mechanism for the team, understanding how to work together as a team, to conduct thorough multi-actor assessments and developing a PCVE case identification approach appropriate to the local context that draws on multiple actors. From Heidi, we'll soon hear about two really important modules. One focused on how to assess the vulnerabilities, needs, and strengths of the referred individuals based on their behaviors rather than on legally protected beliefs or ideas, and how to design and implement tailor-made interventions that respect the do no harm principle. Of course, no PCVE side event, let alone PCV program, would be complete without a mention of monitoring and evaluation. And of course, this curriculum includes a robust module on the importance of monitoring and evaluating both the intervention program itself, as well as the individual interventions that are delivered as a result of the program. And for this particular discussion, I want to highlight the module on stigma and the different ways in which stigma can rear its head and complicate efforts to make progress with these programs, whether it's regarding the scope and branding of the program or the terminology used to describe the program, and ensuring there's sensitivity to the concerns and priorities of the communities the program is meant to support, whether it's a certain level of awareness and transparency about the program and its purpose within the community, whether it's making sure assessments are conducted by individuals who have the necessary training to increase the likelihood they avoid a quote-unquote checklist approach, which risks wrongfully targeting individuals based on discriminatory grounds, whether it's ensuring the program focuses on individuals' legally protected ideas, does not focus on individual ideas and beliefs which are legally protected, but focuses on their behaviors. The curriculum highlights not only the ways in which stigma can appear, but also ways to mitigate the stigma. And then it concludes with two pieces. First is an overview of some of the key principles and lessons learned from previous efforts to develop these programs in different contexts, while again recognizing that one size does not fit all. And I'll just illustrate a few of these key principles. The first is ensuring that it's part of a wider, comprehensive, whole of society approach that's grounded in a national CVE, PCVE framework or strategy that promotes social coherence, cohesion, and resilience, and is based on a public health approach to dealing with the challenge. That it avoids a top-down directed approach that doesn't take into account the needs, concerns, and capacities of local stakeholders. Ensuring that the scope and branding of the program is sensitive, again, to the needs of the local constituencies and takes into account the need to leverage existing resources and capacities is critical. The importance of including a transparent protocol or framework to facilitate information sharing among different stakeholders while protecting privacy rights, and relying on non-discriminatory, human rights-based, gender and age-sensitive plans to identify those at risk or of concern based on objectively observable behaviors. The course concludes with an interactive capstone that is designed to allow the participants to apply what they've learned, to apply some of these key principles, and share back into a multi-actor program that they're going to design in the course itself. Ultimately, we expect to see 3 or 4 model programs emerge from these discussions and then further discussed by the participants, and hopefully at least one of them is sort of has the support from the participants to then hopefully be able to carry it forward to a next phase where it can be further developed and hopefully operationalized. Before concluding, I want to underscore 2 particularly important cross-cutting themes in the course. The first sentence centers on the importance of a team-oriented approach to PCVE, and that is one thing we think distinguishes this course from all the other PCVE training tools that are out there, which primarily focus on individual stakeholders, individual practitioners, or themes. And this course is about how do you build a team to address violent extremism on an individual level. So we think it's unique in that regard. And then the second core theme is, again, the importance of respecting the do no harm approach, the concept, throughout, whether it's the design, operationalization, or implementation of the program. And our next two speakers are going to drill down on each of these. First, I'll give the floor back to Nadia to talk more about the partnership building, team-oriented aspects of the curriculum. So Nadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric. Hello, everyone. Thank you to the IIJ and to the EU for the opportunity to be with all of you today. It's a pleasure to be speaking a little bit about the first aspect that we believe again is the key innovative approach to this course. So I'll be speaking a little bit about the aims of the course to provide the tools to build a referral mechanism together. And therefore, several sessions were designed to teach the practitioners who can contribute to PCVE in their own communities, in their own context, to create and operate as a team. The idea is that prevention of violent extremism takes a whole of society effort, as has been mentioned, and the referral mechanism is that effort. It aims to maximize the power of the interwoven capacities of all relevant practitioners in a community, a city, or in a particular context. A referral mechanism which rests on the respective capacities of a comprehensive group of professionals requires several assets. One of those assets is a strong team that's driven by collaboration and having a greater impact together to address the complex problems that underpin radicalization and violent extremism as a whole. This curriculum that we developed and piloted offers the skills to all relevant practitioners who have expertise and the resources to offer to prevent violent extremism and especially radicalization, to gain the skills to create a team which amounts to more than the sum of its parts. One of the strengths of the mechanism is the space that connects the various services in a PVE intervention. So we've built this course around to create those spaces which connects the various services and in which individuals can travel between the different and provide and receive different interconnected services. The course teaches how a team can make up a referral mechanism. It starts with teaching key communication skills to empower each individual practitioner to create a safe space and lay the foundation for addressing radicalization threats together in order to leverage the full potential of the team and the dynamics it offers. The curriculum goes on to offer a variety of tools for standardized assessment of threats and the development of a common vision of those threats, as well as understanding of the legal tools that exist in a given context. So once participants learn how to communicate with each other, how to take a learning stance and understand the comparative advantages that they each bring to the team and how weaving themselves into this team gives them an additional opportunities, we then teach them to assess together, to create common visions, to gain a common lexicon so they may operate effectively with each other and have a greater impact. Once a partnership mindset has been adopted by the participants in the course, and in order to identify the roles and responsibilities, the team needs to establish what each individual organization can bring to the team. So the course teaches how to map out the stakeholders that will make up the team, those that are already in the team and those that are desirable to the team that may not necessarily be involved right away. Overall, we teach the team how to seek to understand the legitimacy, the credibility, and the resources of each member, all to understand the political leverage of each team member, and the impact and the special assets that each team can provide. For example, a religious leader or a mental health professionals each have a variety of assets and resources and knowledge that they can bring to the team that enhances the entire team's impact. Overall, the curriculum offers a process for negotiating roles and responsibilities. This includes skills and approaches to establish customized mechanism for coordination and collaboration, and to promote transparency, trust, and consensus building that are right-sized for the particular context and maybe even the particular case. The expert consultations we conducted at the onset of the project also pointed to the need to enable effective information sharing among relevant actors. So the approaches and systems to put in place, such as information sharing dynamics, are included in the course. We also included and taught how to identify needs and resources for the mechanism to get a clear picture of the program's potential and also understand its gaps and its needs. Some of those gaps may be addressed by training of the members of the team, so the curriculum also offers insights on identifying the necessary capacity building for the team and its individual members should they need it. Overall, this team then went on with the curriculum, as Eric described a few minutes ago, to understand and discuss together and to exercise together some of these skills that were offered to them, and then to identify the most relevant and effective referral mechanism approaches that they can take on together as a team. I will stop there. I look forward to any discussion or questions, and I will turn it back over to Eric. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Nadia. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Heidi Ellis, an associate professor in psychology and psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School and Boston Children's Hospital, and a licensed clinical psychologist. She's also the director of the Trauma and Community Resilience Center at Boston Children's Hospital, a partner in the National Child Traumatic Stress Network in the United States. Dr. Ellis is co-developer of the trauma treatment model Trauma Systems Therapy and is engaged in capacity building and training related to trauma-informed multidisciplinary approaches to the repatriation and reintegration of children from formerly ISIS-controlled territories. She also directs the Massachusetts Area Prevention Framework, a multidisciplinary team approach to preventing targeted violence and terrorism among adolescents in that region. It's my pleasure now to give the floor to Heidi, who will talk a bit about two of the most important modules in the curriculum, both of which she developed, one on assessments and one on interventions. So Heidi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you all for the opportunity to share some of this important work. Now, I'm going to have some slides for this. So if those could be pulled up, great, thank you. So as Eric mentioned, I'm going to present an abbreviated version of two of the modules of the curriculum. And these are focused on assessment and intervention related to vulnerabilities, needs, and strengths. Next slide, please. The goal of these modules is to provide a framework and specific guidance for assessments and interventions within a multi-actor framework and ensuring throughout it a do no harm approach. Next slide, please. During these two modules, we'll be looking at the following questions, which will allow us to accomplish our learning objectives. First, what do we need to assess at the level of the individual so that we can take our knowledge of the needs and strengths and vulnerabilities and then turn that into a meaningful intervention for that individual? And how do we take into consideration that individual's age and gender and make sure we're avoiding potential harm at every step? Next slide, please. As it has been discussed previously here, PCVE often involves a whole of society approach. This is true not only at a programmatic level, when we talk about which partners to engage in a multi-actor team, but also at the level of the individual. How an individual grows, flourishes, or struggles is driven by much more than their individual makeup. It has to do with the layers of the social ecology around them. In socio-ecological theory, the individual is understood to be affected by all the layers of the social ecology that surround him or her. While at the individual level, they bring a set of strengths and vulnerabilities, the way these play out is affected by their social ecology, by the family setting and close relationships, by their neighborhood, school, or work environment, and beyond this, by the larger community, society, and culture that surrounds them. Disruptions in any one layer of that social ecology, for instance, conflicted family relationships or bullying at school or a sense of stigma within larger society, can profoundly influence the individual. But the inverse is also true. Constructive relationships with family members, government services that promote a sense of trust and inclusion, or positive social experiences can lead to positive developmental changes. The assessment and intervention approach we will talk about today is rooted in the idea that an effective treatment plan will depend on a thorough assessment of strengths, risks, and needs across the layers of the social ecology. Next slide, please. Let's start with understanding what goes into an assessment under this framework. So assessment is critical to setting things up for success. And I think of it like the parable of the man who has lost his key and is looking for it under the streetlight. When a bystander asks him if this is where he lost it, he says, "No, I lost it in the park, but this is where the light is." We know he will never find his key if he does not look in the right place, even if it is harder to do so. Assessment is much the same. If you do not take the time and effort to do a thorough assessment and set it up so that it emphasizes strengths rather than stigmatizing someone, you may miss the key to helping that person. An intervention plan can only be as good as the assessment on which it is built. A thorough and accurate assessment is necessary to ensure the most critical domains are addressed. Next slide, please. Assessment is about the content, but also the process. Assessment sets up the relationship between the team and the individual being served, and central to this is the idea of do no harm. An assessment that stigmatizes an individual or that fails to recognize their strengths can actually undermine the goals of the whole program. On the flip side, an assessment that conveys positive regard for the individual and communicates genuine care can lay the foundation for enduring trust and engagement by that individual in the program. Trust, again, not just at the programmatic level, but at the individual client interaction level, is essential. Next slide, please. Assessment can mean very different things depending on the discipline that you're talking about. This is especially important to understand in a multi-actor team context. Security fields may emphasize assessment of risk. Psychology may emphasize assessment of individual psychological factors such as mental health. Social work may emphasize practical and logistical needs and resources. And community partners may emphasize family perspectives and priorities. Under a multidisciplinary team assessment, the goal is to conduct an integrated assessment across these areas, such that a 360-degree understanding of an individual's strengths, needs, and risks can be developed and addressed. This allows for better engagement, more strategic use of resources, and the opportunity to provide an integrated treatment approach that can leverage the greatest positive change. Next slide, please. A comprehensive assessment should cover multiple areas across the social ecology, as well as at the level of the individual. So we've broken them down into three main areas. First, strengths and needs, which includes looking at social, cultural, relational, psychological, and practical factors. Second is risk, which involves both the individual's risk for violence, but also any potential risk to that individual. And finally, third, barriers that might impact their engagement in intervention. Next slide, please. So, how do you go about getting this information? There are two basic approaches to this, and they're often used together. The main approach involves a good clinical interview and case history paired with information gathering from collateral sources. Conducting this kind of interview requires significant training. Mental health professionals typically receive training in this area. Depending on the background of the team or the assessors, additional training and support in this area may be helpful. When mental health providers are not available, other community workers may be supported to learn these skills. In addition to the clinical interview, some programs may choose to implement more structured instruments in order to have a better understanding of some of the specific areas. For instance, there are a number of trauma screeners available that can help to assess traumatic exposure in a way that is developmentally appropriate. Next slide, please. The second key area in our assessment framework is assessing risk. First, I want to think about why we include risk assessment as part of a psychosocial assessment in the first place. You may be thinking, well, risk is assessed by law enforcement. That's their job, not part of psychosocial support. Or you may be thinking, risk should be assessed as part of the screening process. By the time an individual gets to me, I should know they are not at risk for doing anything dangerous. Yes, true that risk assessment takes place at those different phases and by different people, but it is also an important part of understanding what kinds of support an individual needs and whether you are able to provide enough support to ensure safety. Risk is also not a static characteristic. It can change. So as someone involved in providing psychosocial assessment and intervention, it is very important to know what to look for, to continually update thinking about risk, and to know when the services you have to offer are perhaps not sufficient given the risk level. The goal of risk assessment is ultimately to prevent violence, but interim goals can include assisting decision-making about what can be done or guiding action, enhancing accountability, protecting rights of patients and offenders, and minimizing professionals' exposure to liability by ensuring transparency and consistency. Next slide, please. As is illustrated by this quote, understanding risk is not separate from the earlier discussion we had about understanding and assessing strengths and needs. This is from EU RAN. Linking risk factors to protective factors allows for a positive, action-based approach that highlights social policies and practices of individual care and counseling. This is the foundation for a genuine preventive outlook in which all kinds of risks of radicalizations are mitigated. So a good risk assessment will take into account the social environment that surrounds an individual and the ways, both good and bad, that this interacts to either promote or protect an individual from engaging in violence. But we also want to make sure that we have a way of specifically assessing risk. How do we do this? Next slide, please. The best approach to risk assessment is to use what is called structured professional judgment. An evaluator using structured professional judgment will conduct an interview that is informed by an understanding of risk factors with additional instruments or checklists to guide collection and analysis of information. This is recognized universally as good assessment practice. Structured professional judgment provides guidance to practitioners to structure their judgments of risk based on key indicators that have theoretical or empirical links to violence. It's a holistic assessment that integrates information from multiple sources. It also provides some structure and systematization, while at the same time helping to tailor the assessment to the unique context of the individual. Next slide, please. This slide lists several commonly used instruments that can aid in structured professional judgment, such as the Violent Extremism Risk Assessment, or the VERA 2R, or the Extremism Risk Guidance, ERG 22+. These have been introduced and used widely in counterterrorism and are making their way into de-radicalization or disengagement and other PCBE activities as well. Next slide, please. The final area of assessment in our framework is what we call barriers to care. You can have the best program ever, but if the individual doesn't engage, it doesn't work. To facilitate engagement, you have to consider practical, cognitive, and emotional barriers to care and work to align the services with a family's goals. Practical barriers involve challenges such as language, transportation, time, money, childcare. Cognitive barriers have to do with perspectives or beliefs that might interfere with engagement, such as when an individual believes this won't work, this isn't what I care about, or this will lead to stigma in my community. Emotional barriers relate to how an individual feels about a program or provider and are often based in past experiences. These may involve feelings of distrust, disillusionment, or even anger. Next slide, please. These barriers need to be recognized and addressed for an individual to truly engage. Strategies for addressing cognitive barriers can involve making room to hear and take seriously an individual's concerns. It also may help to take the time to understand what they believe will work, identify past experiences that may be informing these perspectives, and provide hope. Strategies to overcoming emotional barriers can include using the assessment process to build a relationship, maybe engaging a trusted liaison in the assessment process, and practicing reflective listening and a non-judgmental stance. Next slide, please. Okay, now that we've talked about what we want to learn during the assessment, let's shift to thinking about who is in a position to get that information. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Depending on the context, the police could play a role in assessing risk. However, too much police involvement can undermine the trust from non-law enforcement professionals, practitioners, and local community members. Family workers will be more involved in mapping the concerns and needs of the family. And as mentioned before, sometimes teams pair a trusted liaison or cultural broker with the assessor to facilitate engagement and also to help the assessor better understand the role culture may play in client expectations, attitudes, and behavior. Next slide, please. Assessment may be done by one individual with appropriate expertise, but sometimes different aspects can be done by different people and brought together. Regardless of who does the assessment, it is key to leverage the assessment process to build relationships and trust. And developing appropriate information sharing protocols is critical to ensuring that all the different pieces of the puzzle can be put together. Next slide, please. Once a thorough assessment has been conducted, the next step is to translate our new understanding of the individual's strengths, needs, and risks into an effective intervention plan. This is where it all comes together in meaningful change for an individual and ultimately society. Next slide, please. Interventions may take place at any or multiple levels of the social ecology. The particular constellation of interventions will be tailored to the individual's strengths and needs and will not necessarily look the same from one person to the next. Next slide, please. Recall that in the assessment slides, we talked about 5 main areas of strengths and needs that should be assessed. These are social, cultural, relational, psychological, and practical. The task of the team following the assessment should be to translate these assessments into intervention. As I said, there's no single approach to intervention that will work for everyone. Instead, team members should work together to identify an intervention or suite of interventions that they believe will most meaningfully address the needs of the individual, build on their strengths, and create conditions in which risk is ultimately diminished. The intervention approach may also shift over time as new needs emerge or as an individual progresses through treatment. Regular discussion of cases among team members can help facilitate this continued tailoring of the plan. The interventions offered should also be specific to your local context and resources. We'll review types of interventions that may be helpful in addressing the various strengths and needs, But ultimately, the package for each individual should be tailored according to their needs and strengths, as well as the community's resources. This slide shows various examples of the types of interventions that might fall under the different domains. Next slide, please. Once the full assessment has been reviewed and potential interventions identified to map onto the identified needs and strengths, the team must put together an intervention package. This can be as simple as a single intervention, such as connection with a mental health provider, or may involve multiple providers and interventionists who work together to provide a suite of services for the individual. Regardless, a few key principles underlie this step. First, consider engagement. What is a priority for the individual or the family? What will motivate their engagement? No intervention will work if the individual is not motivated to engage in it. Second, beware of too many interventions. This can undermine the work by overwhelming the individual and threatening engagement, or by fostering resentment within a community that might perceive that individual as receiving unfair benefits. And third, intensity of intervention needs to match risk level. The higher the risk, the more critical it is that interventions are intense enough that risk can be both mitigated and monitored. Next slide, please. Ultimately, each piece of the intervention package should work to reinforce the others so that the overall package is more than the sum of its parts. Next slide, please. Through streamlined communication and coordination, which takes place through the team, each intervention can be maximized and magnified so that ultimately the whole package is effective. Next slide, please. Who provides the intervention will depend on which interventions are identified for the individual. Ideally, the team includes members who can provide some of the identified services or support, or who is connected via a network to relevant service providers. Networks of providers in the community can also be identified, and over time, the multi-actor team can help to build their capacity to work with referred individuals. Typical providers might include social workers, youth workers, mental health providers, police or probation officers, community advocates, drug and alcohol counselors, or formers. Ideological experts may play an important role. Whether it is an imam or a former right-wing extremist, it can be useful to involve someone who can talk to the family or the individual about the ideological dimension. They might ask questions such as, where do the ideas come from? What are their sources? And why are they reliable or not? What are alternative perspectives? Finally, a case manager will be critical to ensuring that the interventions are well coordinated. Next slide, please. Assessment and intervention should be tailored to an individual's developmental stage and gender, recognizing that children are not just little adults, but instead have their own unique cognitive and developmental style and are embedded in child-serving systems and layers of the social ecology. Next slide. And they should also be gender sensitive, including consideration of both who conducts the assessment or intervention, as well as what the assessment and intervention plan includes. Next slide. And finally, across all the work, it is critical to bear in mind the fundamental principle of do no harm. Next slide. In summary, effective multi-actor assessments and interventions should be tailored to the individual's needs and strengths, mindful of the do no harm principle, built on trusting relationships and respect for the individual, and the result of a collaborative multi-actor effort. Next slide. And with that, I would like to turn the floor back over to Eric. Thank you.
thank you, Heidi, for that, and I hope all the participants on this workshop got a flavor of what the curriculum will offer. And we're now pleased to be able to have some of the practitioners who participated in the development of the curriculum when it was piloted. First, Rahima Zaid Abuyi, she's from Kenya. She has over 10 years of experience in peace CVE programming and holds a BA in Peace and Conflict Studies, and currently serves as programs manager at Integrated Initiatives for Community Empowerment in Kenya. She's an accredited member of FemWise Africa Mediation Team under the umbrella of the African Union, and has sat on a number of task forces, including one on the validation of regional and county PCV action plans in her home country, Kenya. Rahima, the floor is yours, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, IIJ, and thank you, European Union, for this great opportunity. And hi everyone. My presentation will focus on the application of the curriculum. Kenya has made great strides in PCV efforts, but there still remains some gaps on implementation, and we believe that this curriculum provides some tools to address some of these gaps. Next slide, please. So one of the gaps that we are experiencing is on lack of collaboration and information sharing. And we believe that this curriculum on multi-actor collaboration provides this opportunity. And I would say that since when we attended the pilot program, some of the participants or the stakeholders that were able to attend the program, we've been able to work in close collaboration. And I would say, I will highlight some of the efforts that we've been able to achieve from the diverse group, and also some of the achievements at the regional level, and some of the things that we aspire to achieve through using the training tools. And one of the key area is on regional collaboration. Recently, I was one of the lead facilitator in the AU training, and one of the real strong emerging issues was the need for regional collaboration on PVE efforts. And we have been having some ongoing efforts in incorporating youth, women, and religious leaders in various counties. Here I've just mentioned a few. And I believe this curriculum provides a platform whereby we'll be able to include and work collaboratively. And I would say that the curriculum is a stitch on time for Kenya, because we are currently implementing county action plans with different pillars. So I believe if the different stakeholders are able to come together and assess on the capability of each stakeholder, then this will provide the best platform for teamwork in strengthening each other's effort, maybe through inter-county exchange programs and other platforms. And also this curriculum has also strengthened some of ongoing effort which were there. Initially, there was a big hesitant for CSOs to work closely with the government, but now at least we can celebrate some success stories, and this was witnessed in terms of the reviewing and implementation of the action plan. The state and CSOs were able to sit together, review the county action plan, and even reached a consensus. This is a great milestone in PVE efforts. Next slides, please. And then still on the issue of collaboration, recently we worked closely, ISEP Kenya worked closely with another CSO, this is Amani Kibera, and in coming up with a research to look at some of the impact of social and economic impact of COVID-19 and how this will impact on the trends of peace and security. And some of the results, we were not able to share some of the results with the community because we adopted the do no harm approach and conflict sensitive reporting to ensure that we don't stigmatize certain communities, and instead our efforts are geared towards mitigating the effects of VE and not radicalizing more people within the communities. Next slide. And then there is a threat of the shrinking space of civil society. I believe we time this curriculum because of common objectives, transparency, mutual trust, and open channels of communication. If CSOs will continue sitting and having dialogue with the government, with time, we will not see each other as a threat. Instead, we'll be working towards reaching consensus because most of the decisions that will come up with are from mutual agreement. And also this training has enabled the diverse participants, because the participants who were included in the training were both from the states and CSO. So during the pandemic, the training helped us, some of the tools from the training helped us to mitigate some of the psychological effect, because we had some focus group discussions to discuss on the impact of the pandemic on the trends on peace and security, and also the socio-economic impacts, and even brainstorm some of the ways we can work collectively to minimize some of the negative impacts. Next slide, please. And another challenge that we are facing as a country, women at the local level are still feeling marginalized. And I believe if we adopt the whole society approach, then women and other stakeholders in our societies who are feeling marginalized will be able to participate effectively in implementation of PVE programs. And we are lucky that in Kenya, in the refresh strategy, we'll have a gender pillar. And also in some of the counties, we have gender pillars. So I believe this is a great opportunity for counties through the county action plans to strengthen the participation of women. Next slide. And then I think at this point, I will say there is need for flexibility. And if donors will be sitting on the table with the local communities to negotiate who's supposed to take the implementation of programs, because if the donors just come up with ideas and they impose to the communities, then in the long run, we will have lack of ownership, participation, and sustainability of programming, because by the time the donor goes, he goes with his program. So it is very important that I wouldn't say directly which model we should take, but I will say it is important that we sit at the table right from the time when we are designing the program and agree on the modalities. If they are willing to instead of initiating maybe a new program, they can incorporate their ideas into already existing programs and adopt based on specific context and not impose programs on communities. Next slide. And also another key challenge is the inability to diagnose the drivers of violent extremism. So we believe that if people have regular consultations in looking at the CAPs and also a diagnosis of the local drivers of VE, then it will be able to prioritize. For example, in the county action plans for a specific county, they will know which driver is a priority, so that specific pillar in the county action plan can be given a priority in implementation. And this will also help in the division of role, so that we have for example, a module on psychosocial support and another module maybe on capacity building, so that each stakeholder can pick up their role based on the expertise, and also by strengthening teamwork, information sharing, and also this will assist in referral, so that one person doesn't end up taking roles which they are not even qualified with. So I believe this is very key in coming up with the right interventions, because if we diagnose the drivers wrongly, then the whole process will end up to be wrong, and then we'll just be mark timing in implementation of PVA programs. Next slide, please. And then also we also need to be keen on the unintended negative impact. For example, I think I had highlighted previously on the findings that we had from the rapid assessment from Kibra on social cohesion. And in this context, we are trying to map some COVID hotspots and some of the impacts. How, for example, has the enforcement by government officials impacted social cohesion in the community? And maybe if we narrow down, we can also say that the law enforcers had an impact on the trends of radicalization, but we were very keen, and we said some of the information that we got from the Nairobi slums we will not share with everyone, but maybe we can unpack this by coming up with another intervention instead of profiling certain communities or certain villages. And initially, PVE programming in Kenya was like it was targeting certain communities, but we are very proud to say that there is ongoing effort to ensure that everyone is included and that no one is left behind. And as some of our colleagues had so much emphasis on the public health approach, so we are working very collaboratively both with the state, the police, and other stakeholders to address the various levels, right from the primary, second, and the tertiary levels of interventions. Next slide, please. Another important area will be on the M&E. We have a lot of programs in Kenya, but it has not been easy to speak about the impact. So we believe that the tools that are provided will enable us to come up with evidence-based solutions and context-specific, so that sometimes you have a scenario whereby a program that is implemented in Garissa, in other counties, the same program that is implemented maybe in 3 or 4 more counties, without considering the specific drivers of each county. So we believe that this module will help to ensure that we are able to implement programs based on needs of a certain community, and not for donors' convenience, because okay, they've designed this program and they feel that it should be implemented in the same program to be implemented in different counties. The next slide, please. And I would insist on prevention, creating sustainability, and leveraging on local resources to avoid wastage, and, for example, local capacities, and to encouraging sharing of resources. As I think some of the points I had mentioned earlier on the donors working very closely with the communities and involving them meaningfully at each stage of programming, and not just hijacking the communities. The communities need to feel that their needs are being addressed, and know that we are taking this program because there is funding for this program. No, people should take program because there is need to intervene on a certain problem in a community, and not because the funding is there. Now let's just implement the program. Next slide. Okay, I had mentioned about the issue of stigma. It's very important that we cause no harm to anyone as we are implementing these programs. And also, we will also emphasize on Kenya being used as a model because of the achievement Kenya has had. And for example, when my recent interaction with AU, I was able to share part of the curriculum. And I believe Kenya can be a model in terms of, because of the milestones that we've made in terms of the county action plans, and we've implemented this for a long time. So Kenya can be used as a model to assist in rolling out this curriculum in other countries within East Africa and even beyond. And even when you have opportunities to speak at the regional level, for example, IGAD, AU, we can be the lead voices in part of promoting this curriculum at the Horn of Africa and beyond. Next slide, please. And I will say thank you. And just to echo some of the key points from my colleagues, I will emphasize on collective efforts. No one size fits all. And let's talk with each other, not to each other, mitigating risks within our communities. Our intervention should not be another driver of VE. Let's not go to communities, we implement programs, and by the time we leave those communities, we are now become the radicalizers in those communities. Let's try to avoid that. And the whole society approach, no one should be left behind. I always say, and I believe that no one is immune to the effects of terrorism. And for this reason, we really need to complement each other. And I strongly believe that this curriculum will reduce the competition sometimes, which is witnessed within CSOs on the need for resources, because people will be able to work together. And by the end of the day, will come out stronger. Thank you so much. I hand over to my senior colleague, Eric.
Thank you very much, Rahima, for showing us the ways in which, some of the ways in which the curriculum is relevant to the wonderful work that you and your colleagues are doing in Kenya, and in particular for reminding us about the importance of ensuring that the donors and other international actors are really attuned to what the local communities and what civil society organizations want and need and feel are the priorities for them before they start investing resources in those communities. So thank you for those important reminders. Now we'll turn to Katrina Gilman, who is the Deputy Director of the Danish Center for Prevention of Extremism. She supervises the center's activities, projects, and ensures coherence between the local needs and policy level, and has been working in the center for a number of years, where she's provided counseling to municipalities and the Danish info houses on preventing violent extremism. And we were delighted that her organization hosted a really important workshop for experts to help with the development of the curriculum, and that she's with us today to talk about some of the connections between the work that they've been doing in Denmark for a number of years and the concepts in the curriculum. So thank you, Katrina. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you to the IIJ and the EU, and also to the very talented female speakers before me. It's been very interesting. So I will just go through a little bit how we're organized in Denmark. I have to say I'm so impressed by the curriculum that's come out of this great work, where a lot of actors have contributed, and a lot of what we do in Denmark is actually some of the same things. So bear with me if there's repetition in some of what we go through now. But please begin with the first slide. Thank you. So just briefly to give you an overview of what the Danish Center for Prevention of Extremism does, we do help council municipalities on
on different tools and how to prevent extremism. We also counsel InfoHouse, which is the multi-actor collaboration on the local level that do the work with the individuals that are in danger of extremism or already involved in extreme groups. And we do a lot of training, professionals. We have some research team in the center that does a lot of background knowledge so that we have a good understanding of what it is that we say to the practitioners. And then we have some people that are experienced from the local level, as myself, just to say something about how important it is to create a good team for this, also on the national level, but also on the local level. That was some of what Heidi was discussing from the curriculum beforehand also. We also try to develop tools and methods for example, for assessing concerns. Also, we have a very huge mentoring program. So we have a network of mentors in the whole country that can help support the local organizational teams. And as I mentioned, the research that we do. So next slide, please. So just to show you very quickly from national to local level how we're organized, because the framework is also quite important when building a referral mechanism in a country. So it's some on the national level, we have from the Ministry of Justice, we have the National Crime Prevention Center with the police, and also the Security and Intelligence Service. And one actor who's actually not in the diagram is the Prison and Probation Service, who's also a major actor. And they support the local level police districts, and also on the security side of it, they support the InfoHouse collaboration. On the social side, we have the Ministry of Immigration and Integration, where our center is placed, and we try to support the local level, the municipalities, local governments through the InfoHouses. And then we also have the education side, which is the building of resilience and the normal build-up of well-being in schools and daycare centers so that you build resilience towards extremism. Thank you. Next slide. And then we have different legislation to support this framework. And just to say, also from some of the points with the do no harm approach, is to, when you have different legislation, it's very important that the actors that are exercising that legislation speak to each other before they do something, so that they don't actually do harm in doing something with the individual in danger from extremism before talking to the other actors, so that they don't undermine each other's actions out on the local level. But in Denmark, we have the security rationale in the penal code with the terrorism paragraphs and so on. And we also have some social legislation which makes it possible for actors to share sensitive information on the personal level, which is quite important for the way we built our approach. And then we have, obviously, the safeguarding paragraphs in this school legislation. Next slide, please. And so just to say how the InfoHouse is organized in Denmark, the InfoHouse is something that has been actually organized for 10 years. So a big deal in building these mechanisms and these teams is that you have to have a huge amount of trust, and you have to have patience and time. It's been a lot of work with going out and creating, the need and systematization of doing this, and actually only last year this final InfoHouse collaboration agreement document was created after I've been working with this for 10 years. So just to say that having a common language, it's difficult and it takes time, especially when you have different rationales, you have different ways of thinking, and so on. But the Info House is the Info House municipality is where we assess concerns, also by looking at risk factors, resources, protective factors, but also by bringing all the information from the different actors together. So does the person in question have a criminal record? Then the police can bring that to the table to assess how concerned the local municipal info house is, and what is the recommendation for some kind of intervention for the person afterwards. And it looks quite like what Heidi presented from the curriculum also. So it's a great way to have a dialogue amongst all these actors that sit together. So next slide, please. Yes. So different actors in the Info House in Denmark, we made some case flow descriptions to make sure that everybody knows when do they have to do something in regards to the person they're concerned about. How is the concern carried through the different systems? Because we have these very closed systems when you have the prison and probation service, for example. How do they communicate with the municipality that the person is released from their prison sentence and so on? And we've collaborated to make these descriptions to make it easier for the local level to actually do that in a flowing way. So we've made these just some examples: psychiatry, prison and probation service, secured institutions, which is youth prison, and asylum system, which is refugee camps and so on in Denmark, and how do different authorities handle carrying concerns through those systems. Thank you. Next slide. So I think actually, let's take just the next slide. Some key questions, which are also actually already in the curriculum that's been made. But it's important, of course, to consider who, what, when, and how. How do you want to meet? And as Rahima mentioned in her presentation also, how do you make sure that people meet regularly to build up the trust, to build the relationships that can make the difference for the people we're concerned about? Which authorities do they answer to? Is there anyone in government you need to have on board in order to pave the way for the practitioners on the local level? What can they do? Which legislation can they use? Is there anything that needs to be adjusted that you need to carry up through government to make it easier, for example? And how do they assess and handle concerns now? And what should be done to make it more holistic, as Heidi told about earlier, I think. Yes, and next slide, just very quickly, it's just a stakeholder analysis can be a good step also to look at what do we have, who's necessary to have on board on the local level, on the national level, and also international partners is a big, and donors, as you said, civil society and so on, and to make that analysis and then start to create real relationships, I think so. Thank you so much. Then I will go back to Eric. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for reminding us of some of the common themes that exist across these kinds of approaches in different regions. So thank you. And we'll now turn to a third region in the Western Balkans to hear from Borche Petrevsky, who's the National Coordinator for Countering Violent Extremism and Combating Terrorism in North Macedonia, as well as the chair of the Intergovernmental Working Group for Reintegration, Resocialization, and Rehabilitation of Returning Foreign Terrorist Fighters, a national expert group that has recently produced standard operating procedures for community-based reintegration of returning foreign terrorist fighters. He previously held different positions in the Ministry of Interior of North Macedonia and is the author of several scientific papers in the field of security and criminology. And we're delighted that he opened up his country to us, at least virtually, to allow this curriculum to be delivered earlier this spring. And it's been a pleasure working with him and his colleagues over the past few months on this, and I'm delighted to turn the floor over to Mr. Petrevsky. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for your support to the Republic of North Macedonia. Dear all, thank you for the invitation to this event. First, interinstitutional coordination and cooperation between the competent state bodies for timely provision of resources and conditions for return, acceptance, and treatment of returning foreign terrorist fighters and their families in North Macedonia are key in the process of their successful reintegration into society. This jointly coordinated multi-agency approach creates a social environment in which every returnee can find his place and a positive social role. Thus, as a system, we contribute to reducing the risk of re-radicalization and recidivism, and thus to protecting the national security of the Republic of North Macedonia and security in a broader context. The development and implementation of program for reintegration, resocialization, and rehabilitation of foreign terrorist fighters and returnees is a challenge for the far more developed Western societies. But I hope that our reintegration model, which we will briefly present to you, will give the desired results, and we could, after a period of 2 or 3 years, jointly analyze and welcome the positive benefits of it. According to the decision of the government of the Republic of North Macedonia, responsible for the repatriation and the reintegration process is the National Coordinator for CVNCT and Interministerial Reintegration Working Group, which prepared the National Reintegration Plan. The National Reintegration Plan, adopted by the government of North Macedonia in June 2020, mapping the municipalities where the reintegration process will be carried out. Local multidisciplinary teams of practitioners have been formed within the local institutions. Inter-reintegration working group has developed standard operating procedures. The competent institutions are continuously working of preparing a risk assessment as well as need assessment. We organize capacity building activities of the practitioners from the competent institutions who are sensitized on these issues, etc. The case with North Macedonia, the SOPs regulates many of the aspects proposed in the curriculum entitled Rule of Law based multi-actor intervention programs for PCV. At the same time, we emphasize that this curriculum is a solid foundation that has the potential to be further adapted to the requirements and needs of our institution in the CVE process. Regarding the reintegration and capacity building of local multidisciplinary teams, having in mind that although North Macedonia based the issue of an effective community-based reintegration, resocialization, and rehabilitation on the so-called soft approach, however, is basically an extremely security issue, and hence part of the committee's task is to identify needs and develop professional capacity building programs for stakeholders working with this vulnerable category of citizens. In order to take the do not harm approach, National Committee for CV and City, when selecting partners and programs in this process, we take into account the specific of the local context, the potential, knowledge, experience, and needs of the institution or partners implementing national plan, etc., as well as the capacities and readiness for coordination with the Office the National Committee. Hence, we are open for cooperation with all stakeholders who demonstrate relevant experience of the area of CV and city, and especially who have demonstrated relevant work experience in the reintegration, resocialization, and rehabilitation. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Borche, for that. And it's pretty clear that North Macedonia has thought through this approach in a very comprehensive way, and the multi-actor local multidisciplinary teams that are enshrined in your approach, I think could be a good practice for other countries that are grappling with the returnee issue to follow. So we look forward to watching that space carefully and closely in your country. Continuing with the North Macedonia focus, we have our final speaker, Maria MJ, who is the Executive Secretary of the Working Group for Reintegration, Resocialization, and Rehabilitation of Returning Foreign Fighters, and works with Mr. Petrevsky on interagency coordination and implementation of national strategic documents and policies related to security policymaking and PCVE. Maria, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eric. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Today, I'm gonna extend the speech of the National Coordinator, Borche Petrevsky, and will try to elaborate more on the North Macedonia model, multi-agency model for reintegration, resocialization, and rehabilitation of the RFTFs. For the purpose to implement the National Reintegration Plan and to make it more operative, the government of the Republic of North Macedonia early this year has adopted a specially designed document called Standard Operating Procedures for the local multidisciplinary teams based in 14 municipalities of the country, targeted critical municipalities. And SOP is designed by the national experts and practitioners. It's a document that defines and provides guidance for coordination and interagency referral and individual interventions in regard to effective reintegration and long-term community-based reintegration. This is a document that clearly describes, provides elaboration of the ownership. So the ownership of the process of reintegration is of the government of the Republic of North Macedonia, who is also in charge to provide the resources from the state budget and with the cooperation with international donors and partners. The SOP also envisages legal provisions and key principles of working with the returning FTFs and members of their families. It also provides an image and categorization of the target beneficiaries and recommendation for intervention in working with them. It provides an overview of measures, specific measures and activities by phases, by 4 phases that the action plan within the SOP and in the National Reintegration Plan has. The first phase 1 envisages activities and interventions which are linked with the preparation for repatriation before the returnees arrive in the country. The second phase is related to specific activities conducted by the institutions at the border at the time of the arrival. Phase 3 is divided in two ways. One, first, phase activities who are conducted in the temporary accommodation facility, and the second, activities who are conducted in the penitentiary facilities. But the most important, maybe most important for this event today, is to talk about the phase 4 activities and interventions implemented in the place of residence, or now we are talking about community-based reintegration, which is a long-term assistance and interventions provision by the state institutions in cooperation with other non-governmental actors. So the government has designed specific activities providing special care and assistance to the RFTFs related with provision of legal assistance, general health care, psychological interventions and assistance, social care interventions and assistance, educational assistance, employability assistance, etc. In regard to the do not harm approach reflected within the curricula with this particularly presented curricula, we can also say that our document, Standard Operating Procedures, envisages a great part of the proposed curricula because it reflects the do not harm approach throughout all the 4 phases of the process of reintegration by involvement of the individual in the process of reintegration on voluntarily basis, applying the soft approach, and the individual customized care and treatment, taking into consideration some specific aspects such as gender and level of trauma, etc., by engaging trained professionals and practitioners by the government institutions to provide psychosocial approach based on proper risk and needs analysis and judgment, respecting confidentiality and privacy, sensitizing local community and general public to avoid discrimination, further violence, etc. Measures to effectively mitigate and manage stigma, guaranteeing security and well-being of each returnee and member of his family, work with the media, religious groups, and communities and civil society organizations and cooperating with them. However, taking into consideration that the Republic of North Macedonia is multi-ethnic and multi-religious and society with visible social and economic gaps, we work to ensure that also other vulnerable categories of citizens in the country are also properly taken care of. Now, if I can have the slide, the next slide, with the charts to describe the model, the institutional setting, and the way of the involvement and which institutions are involved in the local multidisciplinary teams who are key unit to implement the National Reintegration Plan. Central local coordination is conducted by the National Coordinator and the Intergovernmental Working Group on Reintegration, or more specific, the expert team. The expert team has right to create a special mobile team that would go based on the needs and requests to provide help and assistance in intervention of the local multidisciplinary teams. On the next draft, we have one visualization of the local multidisciplinary team, taking into consideration that North Macedonia is applying the soft approach. In the center, the lead coordinating institution to implement the National Reintegration Plan and to implement the individual plan for reintegration is the social worker or the Center for Social Welfare. Also, there is an employment service agency representative involved, representative from the educational system on the local level, health representative like a psychologist or a psychiatrist. There is a cooperation and communication with the specially designated professional from the penitentiary unit, We have a regular coordination and communication also with the law enforcement, such as the Agency for National Security and Ministry of Interior. Also, as a partners of the local multidisciplinary team, we have also planned to involve central and local media, civil society organizations, and of course, religious communities and groups. In North Macedonia, we have 14 vulnerable and critically targeted municipalities where reintegration process will take place. We have created 7 local multidisciplinary teams who are already, part of them start to work. We have a number of over 100 practitioners involved in the process of reintegration of a number of around 143 returning FTFs, for which the national coordinator has provided basic capacity building activities and trainings conducted for the practitioners in terms of their familiarization of the basics of the PCV and the phenomena of the returning, of the phenomena of the returnees. Also, we have started to implement specialized trainings conducted for the practitioners of the local multidisciplinary teams who work directly with the FTFs, such as social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, law enforcement, etc. Local multidisciplinary teams conduct regular needs and risk assessment and design and implement individual reintegration plan, providing direct support and assistance. In regard to the proposed curriculum, we can say that it greatly reflects our multi-agency approach, which is also reflected within the SOPs. Of course, further capacity building activities and adjustment of the proposed training curricula who arrive in the Office of the National CVCT Coordinator will be taken into consideration, and we can work together to further adjust them to the local context and taking into consideration the institutional needs and the setting. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, all speakers, for your contributions. And unfortunately, according to the agenda, we would have now some questions from the audience, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. However, I would like to encourage you to send your questions to us via email or in the chat of the call, so we can answer them in writing to you in the coming days. We've already received them via email and by the chat. Don't worry, you'll get an answer to your question. And now I'll give the floor back to Tom for closing this event. Thank you all for joining. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Adrian. And first and foremost, thanks to everybody that joined us today. I'm sorry that we went a little bit over, but as you can see, this was a very rich curriculum that's developed, and with great thanks to North Macedonia and Kenya, who helped us pilot it. It was great to hear from them with their impressions of how it has been taken on board and looked at by them. I'd also like to thank, in general, all the speakers, Eric, Nadia, Heidi, Rahima, Katrina, Coordinator Borcha, and Maria, MJ. So you guys were all fantastic. I think it's worth noting for Katrina, thank you for hosting us in Copenhagen. That was the very last in-person event that we did. And we know now we see some light at the end of the tunnel, and we're all looking back. The curriculum itself, it's designed to be delivered in person, and we are planning to have it posted on our IIJ website. It's available if anybody would like it now. Eventually it will be posted publicly as a resource for everybody. That was the intent, that we went into this with the European Union. Of course, without the support of the European Union, this whole curriculum would not have been possible. I would just remind that the whole ethos of this is we're really raising the bar of standards in an area where in the fight against radicalization and violent extremism, it's often a lot of talking about what the drivers are, the push-pull factors, but really the how to change this dynamic. The curriculum really addresses this in a very important way with the interagency. And I'm really excited that we had the opportunity to do this, and it's now completed. It's going through the process of now being able to share it with all of you. And finally, if I forgot anybody to thank, I thank all of you as well. My co-chair, Nadia, thank you profusely. All the speakers, all those that joined. And I would just like to say, please, everybody, stay safe, and we'll see you in person soon. Thank you from the IIJ and Malta. Goodbye.